Hi, this video is for anyone who cannot be in attendance next week. It's chapter 3. We're going to do section 1 this morning. And if you have any questions, you can email me at randy_vice@ecboe.org. This chapter is called The Colonies Come of Age. After the French and Indian War, Great Britain would defeat France, and things would begin to change in the colonies. If you look in the 1700s at the original 13 English colonies, you had the New England colonies, the Middle colonies, and the Southern colonies. We studied those briefly last chapter. The New England colonies include Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. The Middle colonies include New York, Delaware, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. And the Southern colonies include Virginia, Maryland, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. If you look at this chart, which is also found in your textbook, you'll see the different things that were built, produced, and traded in each of those colonies. Most of England's colonies were self-governing, and they began to prosper tremendously. The standard of living in what it was the British colonies, the original 13 colonies, was actually better than that in England at the time. People lived longer, they grew taller, less malnutrition. Much of this success came from the British policy of mercantilism. The settlers in the colonies would export raw materials, and they would bring in manufactured goods. One overriding theme of mercantilism is countries must get gold and silver to be self-sufficient. And they have to have a favorable balance of trade, especially with their own colonies. Now, you'll learn this in economics, but a balance of trade means if you have a favorable balance of trade, it means you sell more than you buy. Okay? The Navigation Acts were laws that were passed by Parliament to cement this philosophy of mercantilism. They did not want the colonies to sell their goods to other countries or to buy goods from other countries without first going through Great Britain. You probably noticed I use the term Great Britain. Great Britain is the term we use to the British Isle, the United Kingdom later. At this point, it's still 3 or 4 different countries on the British Isle, all ruled under basically the same monarch. 1651, Parliament passed the Navigation Acts, and these were laws which actually restricted colonial trade. Here's a good diagram of mercantilism. You see the mother country on the left, the colonies on the right. It looked like the mother country would get the best of it, while the colonies were pretty much not treated as well or good. But in reality, both sides benefited from this agreement. The Navigation Acts basically said most products could be sold only to England. They could not be sold to other countries. So the colonies would sell their goods to England, and England would in turn sell them to other countries. In Massachusetts, a lot of colonies were upset with the Navigation Acts and began to smuggle goods abroad. In 1684, King Charles revoked the corporate charter and created a royal colony. What that means, he put it directly under the government of the crown. In 1685, King James II created the Dominion of New England. This really upset the colonies. It basically gave the governor of New York, Sir Edmund Andros, authority over the other colonies. As you can see, pretty much all of New England went under the control of Andros. And then over in Great Britain, you studied this in the 8th grade. You had the Glorious Revolution, where King James II was forced out, and James's daughter, Mary, and her husband, William, came in. Parliament asserted its power over the monarchy, and William and Mary ruled as joint monarchs, the only time in British history where you had a joint monarchy. The Massachusetts colonists arrest Governor Andros, and his counselors. Parliament gave each colony their own colonial charters back, but Massachusetts retained its status now as a royal colony, but with religious toleration. During and shortly after the Glorious Revolution, England began a policy known as salutary neglect. Basically said that smuggling trials would go on in admiralty courts with English judges and no juries. The Board of Trade has broad powers to monitor colonial trade. And even though they had tough laws, they basically did not enforce them as long as the colonies were economically loyal. Self-government was put into place. The governor calls, disbands the assembly, appoints judges, and oversees trade. The colonial assembly was responsible for paying the government, so they had a tremendous influence on the governor. Colonists still considered themselves British, but wanted self-government. This isn't much different than, hey, we consider ourselves Americans. We want Alabama to be able to make our own laws in many areas. The meaning of salutary neglect is when the time period when Britain disregarded America entirely. This limited the English control over the American colonies. It's the reason why we have representative government. It was made to keep the American colonies obedient to Great Britain. A lot of it would be a situation where, let's say that I banned chewing gum in the classroom, but I never checked. And as long as you didn't blow bubbles, you would be okay. That's another example of salutary neglect. You have rules, but you only enforce them in the worst circumstances. Another example would possibly be the immigration situation today. For the most part, even though any illegal immigrant, and I don't like that term, any undocumented person can be deported, in fact, they generally only go after those who've committed serious crimes. The effect on the colonies in England, as you can see in the diagram, England was no longer babysitting, and the colonies felt like we have more freedom. Both the colonies and England, that slide says clones, but both the colonies and England benefited from salutary neglect. It basically gave the American colonies more freedom, and it also allowed England not to have to babysit the colonies. How did it lead to representative government? What were its effects? Basically, by managing themselves, they've developed a history of self-government while still maintaining a loyalty to the monarch. That ends section 1. The next section in the next video will be section 2, the agricultural South. If you have any questions, again, feel free to email me, Randy_Vice@ecboe.org.